The chandelier above us was magnificent. 47 hand-blown crystal drops, each one catching the candlelight and scattering it across the cream-colored walls of the private dining room like something out of a dream. The floral arrangements were perfect. Ivory garden roses and trailing eucalyptus flown in from a grower in the Willamette Valley. The silverware was polished to a mere finish. The sommelier had already opened a 2018 Chateau Margaux without being asked, because that was the kind of restaurant this was. Everything about that Friday evening in October was immaculate. And in the middle of all that beauty, my mother leaned across the long mahogany table, smiled at the woman sitting across from her, and said the thing that made me realize this night would either break me completely or set me free forever. "We love both our girls, of course," Vanessa Bennett said, her voice carrying that particular sweetness that I had learned over 34 years meant something cruel was coming. "But if we're being honest, and I think families who are joining together should be honest, only one of our daughters has truly made something of herself. Clarice is our pride. Amelia," she paused, tilting her head toward me with an expression that managed to look like tenderness. "We're still praying for her." The table responded the way polite, well-dressed people always do when someone says something vicious in a pleasant tone. They smiled, they nodded. A few of them laughed. Softly, carefully, the way you laugh when you're not sure if it's a joke, but you don't want to be the one who didn't get it. I didn't look at my mother when she said it. I looked at my water glass. I took a slow sip, and I thought about the black card in my purse. The one I had used at 3 o'clock that afternoon to prepay the entire evening. Every appetizer, every bottle of wine, every perfectly plated entree. The final bill had come to $47,000, and I had paid it without hesitation, the same way I had been quietly paying for things in this family for the past 10 years without a single person at this table knowing. They were laughing at the charity case. The charity case had bought the room they were laughing in. I set my water glass down, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Because I knew something they didn't. And before this night was over, Nathaniel Prescott was going to say it out loud. "My name is Amelia Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and I'm the founder and CEO of Meridian Capital Group, a private equity firm based in Atlanta, Georgia, managing over $800 million in real estate and investment assets." If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. 2 days before that dinner, I was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 28th floor of a glass tower in Atlanta's financial district, watching the city come alive in the early morning light. I had a double espresso in my hand. Sandra, my executive assistant, had already placed a briefing packet on my desk. 43 pages covering a proposed $52 million commercial acquisition in Chicago's River North Corridor. The deal was solid. Clean title, strong tenant base, favorable cap rate. I initialed my approval on the cover page in under 4 minutes, the same way I had approved hundreds of deals before it. I didn't think about the fact that most people my age were still figuring out their 401k contributions. I didn't think about the fact that 7 years ago, I had been working 3 jobs simultaneously just to survive. Bartending 4 nights a week, processing data for a freelance analytics firm every weekend, tutoring college students in financial modeling on weekday mornings before anyone else was awake. I didn't think about any of that. I had trained myself not to. The past was where I kept my strength, not where I lived. But I was thinking about the dinner. My phone buzzed on the desk. Diana. I picked up before the second ring. "Tell me you're not actually going," she said. No greeting, no warm-up. That was Diana. 15 years of friendship had long since made small talk unnecessary. "I'm going. Amelia. Diana." She exhaled the way she always did when she thought I was being stubborn. "They're going to spend the entire evening telling the Prescotts what a disappointment you are. You know that. That's what they do. Why would you sit through that?" I turned away from the window and looked at the framed deal map on the wall behind my desk. 47 properties across 6 states, each one a small red pin in a sea of possibility. The house my parents lived in was one of those pins. They didn't know that. "Because Nathaniel called me 3 days ago," I said. "He said something feels wrong. He asked me to be there." Silence on the other end. Then, "What do you mean he called you?" "He reached out through a mutual contact in the legal community. He didn't want to go through Clarice. He said he'd been noticing things over the past few months and he wanted someone from the family he could talk to before the engagement was formalized in front of both families." Another pause. And you trust him? I thought about the 2 conversations I'd had with Nathaniel Prescott over the previous 3 weeks. The questions he asked, the careful, unhurried way he listened to the answers. He was a surgeon. He was trained to pay attention to things that didn't add up. I think he's the only honest person in the room going into that dinner, I said, besides me. Diana was quiet for a moment. You already paid for the whole thing, didn't you? It wasn't a question. Someone had to, I said. The restaurant required a deposit. Clarissa's cards are all maxed. My parents haven't had real liquidity in years, and I wasn't going to let Nathaniel's family walk into a Michelin-starred restaurant and end up with an awkward situation at the end of the night because my father thought he could charm his way out of the bill. Amelia, you are the most quietly powerful person I have ever met in my life, and sometimes that genuinely frightens me. I'll take that as a compliment. It was one. Be careful tonight. I was about to hang up when she said one more thing. And the ring? Did you really? Yes. She asked you to cover the difference when her cards declined at the jeweler's? She cried. You know how Clarice cries. 3 minutes of that and I had already reached for my wallet. And she promised to tell Nathaniel she paid for it herself. She promised. Diana sighed. You knew she wouldn't. I knew she wouldn't. So why did you do it? I looked at the Chicago deal file still open on my desk. Because she's my sister. And because Nathaniel deserved to get engaged to someone wearing a real ring, not a scene in a jewelry store. I thought giving her that would give her a reason to finally be honest with him. And if it didn't, I closed the folder. Then at least I'd have a front row seat to what happened next. There's a memory I carry from every holiday season, the way you carry a splinter, not enough to stop you, but always there, just beneath the surface. It was December, about 11 months before the engagement dinner. The whole family gathered at my parents' house in Buckhead, the 5-bedroom colonial with the heated pool and the manicured hedges that my father referred to as the estate. Clarice had arrived first, as she always did, filling the kitchen with noise and energy and the particular kind of performance that comes naturally to someone who films her life for an audience of 50,000 people. She spent the first hour of that dinner describing a new brand partnership with a French fragrance house. My parents nodded along with the focused admiration of people who had invested deeply in a single asset. When she finally paused, my father turned to me. Amelia, how's work? Good, I said. I'm closing out a large project in the Southeast, real estate side. It's been a significant year. Hollis Bennett nodded with the expression of a man who had stopped listening before I finished the sentence. Well, good. Keep at it. At least get yourself something stable before you're 40. My mother reached across the table and patted his hand the way wives pat the hands of men who have just said exactly what they were thinking. I smiled. I passed the mashed potatoes. I ate my dinner. I didn't tell them that the large project I was closing had a net value of $68 million. I didn't tell them that stable wasn't a word I used anymore because it had become irrelevant. I didn't tell them anything because I had learned a long time ago that the truth in this family was not a gift. It was a target. On the drive home that night, I called Diana. Same as always, I said. Same as always, she agreed. We didn't need to say more than that. The morning of the engagement dinner, I received a text from my mother at 11:42. Amelia, please make sure to dress appropriately tonight. The Prescotts are very refined. We don't want any awkward moments. Do your hair properly. I was sitting at my desk reviewing term sheets when the message came through. I read it twice. Then I looked up at the small mirror mounted near the office door. A practical thing, positioned so I could check my appearance before client meetings. I thought about the navy Loro Piana dress hanging in my closet at home. $1,100. No, $3,200. I'd bought it in New York in the spring on a trip for a conference I'd keynoted alongside 3 former Treasury officials. I typed back, I'll be there. I did not type. I have been dressing myself for 34 years and I have never once embarrassed anyone. I did not type. The dress I'm wearing tonight cost more than your car payment. I put my phone face down and went back to work. The restaurant was on Peachtree Street, tucked between a private members club and a boutique hotel that changed its lobby flowers twice a week. I had eaten there exactly 4 times before. Twice for business, once for a colleague's promotion dinner, and once alone on a Thursday evening when I'd closed the largest deal of my career and felt, for about 20 minutes, the specific kind of happiness that has no audience. I arrived at 6:40. 20 minutes early. The maitre d' recognized me by name. I confirmed with him quietly that the account had been settled, that the staff were not to mention it under any circumstances, and that I'd like to be seated before the other guests arrived. He nodded without expression, the way professionals in excellent restaurants always do, and led me through the front room into the private dining space in the back. I sat down at the far end of the long table, the seat nearest the kitchen pass, which was also the seat farthest from the head. I placed my bag on the chair beside me. I ordered water, and I waited. The Prescotts arrived at 7. Eleanor and Raymond Prescott walked in together, and I will tell you something I haven't told many people. The moment I saw Eleanor Prescott, I understood immediately why she had spent 30 years on the federal bench. There was no performance in her bearing, no announcement. She moved through the room the way certain women move, as if the space had been waiting for them, as if they belonged everywhere and nowhere specific at the same time. She shook my hand first. That surprised me. I was at the far end of the table. She would have had to make a small, deliberate detour to reach me before anyone else. She did it anyway. "Amelia," she said, and something in the way she said my name, measured, certain, made me pause. "I've heard a great deal about you." "I hope not too much," I said. She smiled. "Just enough." She held my gaze for 2, maybe 3 seconds longer than was socially expected. Not rude, not aggressive, just attentive. The way a person looks when they are confirming something they already know. Raymond Prescott was warmer in the conventional sense. A broad smile, a firm handshake, the easy confidence of a man who had spent decades teaching and genuinely enjoyed it. "Nathaniel speaks very well of you," he said. I filed that away and said nothing. Nathaniel and Clarice arrived 7 minutes later. My sister was radiant in a champagne-colored gown, the kind of dress that required 3 months of planning and the kind of budget she absolutely did not have. The ring on her left hand caught every light in the room. 3 carats, flawless cushion cut. I knew because I had been standing 3 feet away in the jewelry store when the gemologist described it, right before all 3 of Clarice's cards were declined in succession. She came through the door and went directly to our mother, who hadn't arrived yet, then redirected to Eleanor, then to Raymond. She smiled at me over Raymond's shoulder, quick, bright, already nervous. Nathaniel reached me before she did. He extended his hand, and when I took it, he held it a beat longer than necessary and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." "Neither is the alternative," I said. He nodded, and something behind his eyes settled, like a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been handed the permission to put it down. My parents arrived at 7:15. My father in a tuxedo that I recognized from his 61st birthday party. My mother in a beaded gown that still had the faint crease of a garment that had been removed from its packaging that afternoon. They swept in the way my parents always swept into rooms, loudly, confidently, filling the space with the particular energy of people who need to be noticed. So sorry. Traffic on Peachtree was absolutely impossible," my mother announced, as though she were granting an audience. My father shook Raymond Prescott's hand with both of his own and said, "Wonderful to finally meet you in person, Raymond. Wonderful family you've built here. Remarkable family." Raymond smiled politely. My father did not come to shake my hand. The seating was arranged before I arrived, but the moment my mother sat down, she leaned toward me and said, not unkindly, not loudly, just naturally, the way she said most things, "Amelia, would you mind taking the chair near the kitchen? It'll be easier for the servers, and it gives Clarice and Nathaniel more space near the center." I was already in the chair near the kitchen. I had chosen it deliberately. "Of course, dear," I said. Before the first course arrived, my father looked across the table at Raymond and said, loudly enough for the table to hear, "Our older girl is a little introverted. Not really used to environments like this one. She's more comfortable in smaller settings." Raymond looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Is that right?" "I do prefer smaller meetings," I said. "Easier to hear." Eleanor, who had been quietly studying the menu, looked up at that. She looked at me again. That same look, deliberate, measuring, confirming. I looked back at her steadily, and for just a moment, I had the strangest sensation that Eleanor Prescott and I were the only 2 people at that table who knew exactly what was happening. The first course was a chilled lobster bisque with a drizzle of aged sherry and a single brioche crostini. It was, genuinely, one of the best things I had ever tasted. My mother didn't give me time to enjoy it. The first incident happened before the bisque had cooled to an appropriate temperature. Eleanor turned to me with the natural curiosity of someone who asks questions because she is genuinely interested in the answers. Nathaniel mentioned you work in finance, Amelia. What aspect of the industry? I had my answer ready. I had given versions of it hundreds of times at cocktail receptions and board dinners, calibrated to the audience, never a lie, but never the full picture either. Private equity, primarily. Real estate acquisitions and, oh, private equity, my father laughed. The particular laugh he deployed when he wanted something to sound bigger than he was letting it. He waved his fork in the air. That's a generous way to put it. She processes data for an investment firm somewhere downtown. Little cubicle, computer screen, you know how it is. He turned to Raymond with the conspiratorial warmth of one patriarch to another. She was always more comfortable behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Clarisse has built an actual enterprise, a real public-facing brand. Clarisse smiled into her wine glass. I looked down at my bisque. Eleanor did not look at my father. She looked at me. And she waited, just for a second, to see what I would do. I did nothing. I let it pass. I had spent a lifetime choosing which hills to die on, and this one was not it. Not yet. The second incident arrived with the second course, a roasted beet salad with whipped goat cheese and candied walnuts. My mother had apparently decided that the engagement dinner was also an appropriate venue to begin discussing wedding logistics, and she had apparently decided that this discussion did not require my participation. We were thinking Amelia could manage the floral orders, she said to Eleanor, with the breezy authority of someone who had already divided the labor and was simply announcing the results. She doesn't have Clarissa's social connections, but she's reliable enough for something administrative. The creative vision, obviously, should come from Clarisse. She has the aesthetic sensibility. Eleanor listened to this. Then she turned to me. Do you have a preference, Amelia, for what role you'd like to take in the planning? My mother laughed too quickly. Oh, Eleanor, she's not really the preference type. I'm happy with whatever Clarisse needs, I said, because it was the cleanest possible answer. Eleanor held my gaze for a moment, then she picked up her wine glass. The third incident was the one that should have, in any functioning family, in any room with a normal moral barometer, provoked someone to intervene. Vanessa raised her glass mid-dinner as though a toast had occurred to her naturally and spontaneously, which meant she had been planning it for at least 20 minutes. To Clarisse, she said, her voice warm with that particular parental pride that feels, to the other child in the room, like a physical thing, who has worked so hard and done it entirely on her own terms. We raised a girl who never once had to ask anyone for help, who built her life with her own 2 hands. That is the kind of daughter that makes everything worthwhile. The table raised their glasses. I raised mine. Clarisse, across the table, smiled, the bright, camera-ready smile I had watched her practice on her phone since she was 19 years old. For just a half second, her eyes moved to her left hand, to the ring. She did not look at me. The fourth incident was the one I couldn't put back in the box. The entrees had arrived, a choice between pan-seared halibut and a 32-day dry-aged ribeye, and the table had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a meal that was going well, which is to say that my parents had found their stride. Hollis was telling Raymond about a property deal he'd been involved in, a deal I had heard him describe 7 times at various dinners, each time with a slightly higher number attached to his personal contribution. And then, as if he had simply remembered something, my father set down his steak knife, looked across the long mahogany table at Eleanor Prescott, and said it. I'll tell you something, Eleanor. And I say this not to embarrass anyone, just because I think families joining together should be transparent. We have 2 daughters. Clarisse, you've seen. She's exceptional. She's built a real income, a real platform, a real future. Amelia... He shook his head, almost fondly, as though he were describing a well-meaning stray. We had to cut off her financial support years ago. Tough love. She needed to learn to stand on her own. She's never quite found her footing, but we keep hoping. Tonight is probably one of the nicest meals she's had in quite a while. We're just glad we could bring her along. My mother put her hand over her heart. We love her. We just worry. The table responded in the way polite tables respond. A small, uncertain laugh from someone near the far end. A murmur that could have meant anything. Nathaniel, at the head of the table, set down his fork. He looked at Clarisse. She was looking at her plate. He looked at me. I took a sip of water. I looked directly at my father. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, let the cruelty of what he'd just said hang in the candlelit air where everyone could feel it without being able to name it. And then Nathaniel Prescott pushed his chair back and stood up. He didn't need one. The private dining room was small enough that his voice carried without effort. Nathaniel had spent 5 years in operating rooms where the ability to speak clearly under pressure without raising your voice was not a skill but a requirement. He stood at the head of the table in his custom navy suit, and the room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when they sense something irreversible is about to happen. "Richard, Hollis," he said, "I want to thank you for your candor tonight." My father's chest expanded. He nodded, the way men nod when they believe they are being validated. "Exactly. Transparency between families. I agree completely," Nathaniel said, "which is why I want to add some transparency of my own before we go any further." Clarice looked up from her plate. "Nathaniel, baby, what are—" He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on my father. "I intended to treat everyone tonight," he said. "I spoke to the maitre d' when we arrived. I wanted to cover the bill as a gesture of welcome, family to family." He paused. "He told me the account had already been settled, in full, prepaid this afternoon on a card belonging to Amelia." The color left my mother's face. It didn't drain slowly. It left all at once, the way water leaves a glass when you tip it. My father's fork stopped moving. I'm sure there's a $47,000, Nathaniel said, settled at 3 o'clock this afternoon. The table was absolutely still. I could hear the kitchen sounds through the door, the soft clatter of plates, someone calling an order. Everything at our table had stopped. Nathaniel reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and placed a small folded receipt on the center of the table. He didn't make a production of it. He simply set it down the way you place evidence. "But that's not the only thing I want to address," he said, and his voice dropped, not softer but lower, the way a room temperature drops just before weather changes. He turned finally to look at Clarice. 3 weeks ago, I saw an email receipt on your laptop. You told me you bought the ring yourself. You told me you'd been saving for it, that it was important to you to contribute to this engagement. I believed you." Clarice's hand moved, almost involuntarily, to cover her left hand. "The receipt was a reimbursement confirmation from the jeweler," Nathaniel said. "The card on file was not yours. Clarice didn't pay for the ring. Amelia did. She stepped in when Clarice's cards were declined at the counter, and she paid the difference, which means the woman sitting at the far end of this table, who your parents just described as a charity case who's never found her footing." He looked directly at my father now. "Paid for this entire dinner and paid for the diamond on your daughter's hand, and no one at this table thought she deserved to be thanked for it." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My mother's mouth opened. No sound came. My father looked at the receipt sitting on the table under the chandelier light, and I watched something shift in his face. Not remorse, not immediately, but the cold recognition of a man who has just realized the ground he was standing on was not as solid as he believed. Clarice stared at the ring on her hand. Eleanor Prescott set down her wineglass with the careful deliberateness of a woman who was taking very precise mental notes. Raymond looked at his son with an expression I couldn't fully read. Part pride, part gravity, part something older. Nathaniel had not sat down. He looked across the table at my parents and said quietly, with the specific calm of someone who had decided, before walking into the room, exactly what they were willing to accept. "I'm not building a marriage on the foundation of lies. Not small ones, not large ones, none of them. So before we celebrate anything tonight, I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's actually happening in this family." He sat down. The chandelier went on shimmering. The 47 crystal drops went on scattering light across the cream-colored walls. And at the far end of the table, I set down my water glass, folded my hands in my lap, and for the first time all evening, I allowed myself the smallest, quietest exhale. The night was not over. It had barely begun. The heavy oak door to the private lounge hadn't fully closed before Hollis's hand found my arm. Not a guiding touch, a grip. Fingers closing around my upper arm with the practiced authority of a man who had spent 30 years using physical presence to end conversations before they started. He steered me through the narrow hallway that connected the private dining room to a small VIP anteroom used for cocktail arrivals. Velvet sofas, low lighting, a bar cart with bottles that hadn't been touched. He released me only when the door clicked shut behind us, and by then, Vanessa and Clarice were already inside, and the 4 of us were alone for the first time. Clarice spoke first. "How could you do this to me?" Not a question. A verdict. She was standing near the bar cart, her champagne gown catching the low light, her eyes bright with the specific kind of fury that only ignites in people who have been exposed rather than wronged. She pointed at me, one manicured finger, perfectly steady. This was supposed to be the most important night of my life. I planned this for 8 months. 8 months. And you couldn't let me have one night. One night, Amelia. You had to make it about you. Clarice, don't. Her voice cracked at the edges. You always do this. You always find a way to pull focus. You're jealous. You have always been jealous, and tonight you used Nathaniel to humiliate me in front of his entire family. Nathaniel found the receipt himself, I said. I didn't give it to him. I didn't tell him anything. He saw it on your laptop. Because you left it open. I wasn't in your apartment, Clarice. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Enough, Hollis said. He had positioned himself in the center of the room the way he always positioned himself, slightly forward, shoulders back, taking up the middle of the available space so that everyone else was automatically on the periphery. He looked at me with an expression I had been reading since childhood, the cold, executive calm of a man who had already decided the outcome and was now simply managing the process of getting there. Where did the money come from? It's mine, I said. I earned it. He laughed, a short, sharp sound, more dismissal than humor. You earn enough to drop $47,000 on a dinner? Yes. On a salary from some back office finance position. I don't work in a back office. Then what do you do, Amelia? Because I've been asking that question for 7 years and I've never gotten a straight answer. My mother was standing slightly behind him, arms folded, watching me with the narrowed focus of a woman calculating angles. Did someone give you money? A loan? Are you involved with someone who... It's my money, I said again. I built it. I saved it. I invested it. And I grew it. The dinner is paid for. The ring is paid for. Everything I've given this family has been paid for out of my own accounts, and not one of you has ever asked where it came from, because it was easier to assume I had nothing than to consider the alternative. Silence. Vanessa looked at Hollis. Hollis looked at me. Fine, he said, and the word was not an acceptance but an opening move. Even if that's true, even if you have some money we don't know about, the fact remains that you went behind your sister's back and undermined her in front of her fiancé's family. You had a choice tonight. You could have stayed quiet. You could have let the evening go smoothly. Instead, you chose to blow up Clarice's engagement. I didn't blow anything up. Nathaniel chose to speak. I sat at that table and said nothing for 2 hours. You set this in motion. I paid for a dinner and bought my sister a ring so she wouldn't be humiliated in a jewelry store. She promised me she would tell Nathaniel the truth. She didn't. Clarice made a sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Tell him the truth. Tell him I couldn't afford my own engagement ring. Are you insane? Do you know what that would have done to my brand? To the image I've spent years building? He's not your brand, Clarice. He's the person you're supposed to marry. You don't understand how any of this works. I understand that you're 27 years old and you've been using credit you don't have to perform a life you haven't built. She flinched, then her eyes hardened. Get out of my engagement party. It's not your engagement party anymore, I said, and I said it as gently as I could because it was true, and there was no way to make it kind. Nathaniel stopped the dinner. Whatever happens next happens because he chose to stop it. Not because of me. Hollis stepped forward, close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath, the expensive kind, the kind he'd been nursing since 7 o'clock. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You are going to walk back out to that table. You are going to tell Nathaniel that you exaggerated, that you helped with a small contribution to the ring, nothing significant, and that Clarice has been managing her own finances. You are going to say that you're sorry for the confusion and that you got carried away. I'm not going to do that. Yes, you are. No, I said. I'm not. His face changed. The executive calm cracked along a fault line I had seen open exactly once before, 10 years ago, in the kitchen of this same family, when a different kind of truth had forced its way into the room. If you refuse, he said, and his voice had gone quiet in the way that is worse than loud, I will remove your name from the family trust. Everything I've built, the estate, the accounts, the generational wealth, goes to Clarice. You get nothing. Not 1 cent. He waited. He expected tears or argument or the particular desperate backpedaling of someone who needed what he was threatening to take. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a performance, not a strategy, just the genuine, involuntary response of a person who has just been threatened with the loss of something that no longer exists. Vanessa stared at me. What is funny about this? Your father just told you, he told me he's going to cut me out of the family trust, I said. That's what's funny. Amelia. The trust is empty, Mom. The room went very still. Vanessa looked at Hollis. Hollis did not look at her. What is she talking about? Vanessa said. I took a breath. I had carried this for 10 years. I had carried it deliberately, carefully, alone, tucked away where it couldn't be used against anyone, including me. I had never planned to say it out loud in a small velvet room at a restaurant in Atlanta, but Hollis had walked into this room and threatened me with a ghost, and I found I was no longer willing to pretend the ghost was real. Approximately 10 years ago, I said, Dad was named in a civil harassment lawsuit by 2 former employees, 2 women. The settlement required $500,000 to avoid litigation and a public record. Dad didn't have $500,000 in accessible form without liquidating the trust. I looked at my mother. So he liquidated the trust. Every dollar. He told you it was moved into long-term overseas investments. It wasn't. It was paid to the plaintiffs and their attorneys. Vanessa's face was doing something I had only seen once or twice in my life. The specific blankness of a person whose entire structural understanding of their world has just been removed from underneath them. Richard, she whispered. He also needed $65,000 more than the trust contained, I continued, because I had started and there was no stopping now, and the part that followed was mine. He came to my apartment. I was 24 years old, in the middle of a graduate program, living on a teaching stipend. He sat in my kitchen and he cried, and he said the bank was going to foreclose on this family's home if he didn't produce the remaining balance. He said he had no one else to ask. I watched my mother's hands grip the back of the velvet sofa. I withdrew from my master's program the following week. I took 3 jobs. I bartended 4 nights a week at a hotel downtown. I processed data remotely every weekend for a logistics company. I tutored finance students before sunrise on weekday mornings. I did that for 2 years. And then I paid the remaining $65,000 so the bank would release the lien on this family's home. And then Dad took my sister on a vacation to Europe with what was left in his personal account so she wouldn't ask questions. Clarice had gone very quiet. You told me that trip was a graduation present, she said. Very small, very careful. I know, Hollis said. His voice was different now. The architecture of his authority had collapsed, and what was underneath it was just a tired 63-year-old man who had been lying for a very long time. The oak door opened. None of us had heard footsteps in the hallway. None of us had heard the handle turn. We had been so deep inside the room, inside the confession, that the outside world had stopped existing for a few minutes. Eleanor Prescott stood in the doorway. Her posture was exactly as it had been at the dinner table, straight, unhurried, entirely composed. She looked at the 4 of us in turn, at Hollis, who had gone pale, at Vanessa, who was still gripping the sofa, at Clarice, who had sat down at some point and was staring at the floor, at me. She stepped inside. She closed the door behind her. I apologize for the interruption, she said in a tone that made clear she was not apologizing at all. As a former federal judge, I've presided over a significant number of fraud and harassment cases. What I've just heard described constitutes, at minimum, financial concealment from a spouse, potential tax irregularities, and the coercion of a young adult family member under economic duress. She looked at Hollis with the mild, clinical attention of someone examining a document for signatures. I thought you should know that someone outside this family has heard it. She looked at me. Amelia, she said. When you're ready, Nathaniel and Raymond are waiting. She opened the door. She waited. I picked up my purse. I smoothed the front of my dress. I walked out of that room without looking back at any of them. Not at my father, standing with his hands at his sides like a man waiting for a sentence to be handed down. Not at my mother, who had started crying very quietly into the back of her hand. Not at Clarice, who was staring at her engagement ring with an expression I couldn't name. I walked through the hallway and back into the restaurant, and I did not feel anything in particular. I had expected to feel lighter, having said it out loud. I had expected some kind of release. What I felt instead was very tired and very clear. I drove home alone. The Atlanta skyline slid past the car windows in its Friday night configuration. Bright and purposeful, the city running its weekend version of itself. I kept the radio off. I drove the way I do when I need to think. Carefully, at exactly the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2. My penthouse was on the 23rd floor of a building in Midtown. I'd bought it 3 years earlier, cash transaction, closed in 11 days. The building manager had called it the fastest close he'd ever processed. I hadn't mentioned that I'd been preparing for it for 2 years. I set my bag on the kitchen counter. I put the kettle on. I stood at the window and looked at the city for a long time. Diana called at 10:47. "Talk to me," she said. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was how she showed she understood the gravity of something. Diana was constitutionally incapable of silence unless the situation demanded it. When I finished, she was quiet for 5 full seconds. Then, "They're not going to let this sit." "I know. Hollis is going to come back at you. He's going to find some way to reframe it, some way to make you the aggressor, and he's going to do it fast before the story solidifies." "I know. So what are you going to do?" I looked at the city. "Go to sleep. And then tomorrow, I'm going to wait for them to show me which direction they choose to come from." Diana exhaled slowly. "You're the most patient person I've ever met, and I say that as someone who finds your patience genuinely alarming." "Good night, Diana." "Good night. Text me when you wake up." I drank my tea. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. My phone was face down on the nightstand when I woke at 6 the next morning. I knew before I turned it over. 83 missed calls. The notifications had stacked so deeply the phone had stopped counting some of them. I sat up against the headboard and scrolled through them without opening any. Aunt Brenda, 7 calls, 4 texts. Cousin Derek, 3 texts, 1 voice message. Extended family members I spoke to twice a year, flooding in with the predictable loyalty of people who had heard only one version of the night before and chosen the most comfortable one. I opened the texts. Aunt Brenda, "What you did to your sister is unconscionable. She has worked so hard and you are jealous. You have always been jealous, and I want you to know this family sees you." Cousin Derek, "You are a disgrace to this bloodline. Clarisse is crushed." 3 other relatives, variations on the theme. The flying monkeys, Diana called them. The people who don't need to know what actually happened because a grievance from someone they love is sufficient. I did not reply to any of them. I opened social media. Clarisse had posted at 2 in the morning. The thumbnail was a photograph of her sitting on her bedroom floor, knees pulled to her chest, mascara tracked artfully down her face. 60,000 followers, not the 50,000 from the original story. She'd had a good month. The video was 9 minutes long. I watched 40 seconds of it, enough to understand the architecture. She was describing a sister with narcissistic tendencies. A woman who had shown up to ruin what should have been the happiest night of her life. A mentally unstable family member who had fabricated financial claims out of jealousy. She was crying beautifully. She had always known how to cry beautifully. The comments were moving fast. Thousands of them, mostly strangers who had never met me, calling me names with the confident righteousness of people who believe they are responding to the truth. I screen recorded the entire video before she could think through the legal implications and take it down. I screenshotted the defamatory comments she was actively liking and responding to with heart emojis. I screenshotted every abusive text from the family members. I opened my email, created a new folder labeled Evidence, Personal, uploaded everything into it, and forwarded the folder to Thomas Hartwell with 4 lines. Thomas, "My sister has posted a defamatory video publicly accusing me of mental illness and fabrication. I've attached screenshots of the video and comments. Family members have sent abusive messages I've also attached. Please draft cease and desist orders for Clarisse Bennett and the following individuals, but hold them. Don't send yet. Let them add to the file." I closed my laptop. I made coffee. I stood at the window and watched the Saturday morning version of Atlanta come alive below me. Joggers and dog walkers and the first delivery trucks of the day. The trap had been shown to me. I could see its outline clearly now. Clarisse was managing the public narrative. That meant Hollis and Vanessa were managing the legal strategy. I gave them 36 hours. It took them less than 20. The call from Thomas came on Sunday afternoon while I was reviewing the Chicago deal's final term sheet. He didn't open with pleasantries. "We have a serious situation. Your parents retained Gregory Thorne this morning and filed an emergency conservatorship petition with the county court approximately 2 hours ago." I set down my pen. They've submitted a sworn affidavit claiming you exhibited signs of severe psychological instability at Friday's dinner. Erratic behavior, disordered financial decisions, threatening conduct toward family members. They're petitioning the court to grant them full authority over your personal and financial affairs on the grounds that you lack the mental capacity to manage your own estate. I didn't say anything for a moment. Gregory Thorne, I said. Yes, he's dirty, but he's effective. He has contacts in the county clerk's office, and he knows how to push emergency petitions through quickly. A process server is already en route to your office building. How quickly could he get a temporary order? If he finds a sympathetic judge and the petition looks credible on the surface, which it does because they've been careful about the language, potentially within 72 hours. A temporary order could freeze your accounts and restrict your access to Meridian's operations pending a full hearing. I looked out the window at the Sunday skyline. A plane was crossing it from west to east, catching the afternoon light. Thomas, I said, don't file an injunction. A pause. I'm sorry? Don't block the petition. Let them file it. Let them push it forward. Another pause. Longer. Amelia, I understand you have a strategy, but I need you to walk me through it before I agree to leave the door open on a conservatorship filing. The conservatorship petition triggers mandatory financial discovery, I said, to demonstrate that they are financially competent to manage my estate, which is the standard the court applies to a proposed conservator. They have to open their own financial records. Full disclosure. Under penalty of perjury. Silence. They think they're using the legal system to get access to my money, I said. What they've actually done is hand us the legal right to take their finances apart in front of a judge. Every credit card, every mortgage default, every outstanding debt, all of it becomes court record. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I want to look at the petition language before I agree to this, he said finally. And I want to begin preparing the counter-filing in parallel. If we're going to let this proceed, we need to be 3 steps ahead before they're 2 steps in. Agreed. Start pulling their financial records the moment the discovery phase opens. I want everything. Credit history, outstanding balances, tax liens, the lease on Clarissa's car. I want the full picture. I'll have a team on it by morning. One more thing. Check the deed history on the Buckhead property. Meridian's acquisition of that mortgage. I want to confirm the chain of title is airtight before this goes anywhere near a courthouse. A brief pause. Already confirmed. The deed transfer is clean. Recorded with the county clerk 2 years and 4 months ago. You are unambiguously the property's legal owner. Good, I said. Then let them file. I hung up. My phone buzzed immediately with a text from Vanessa. Amelia, sweetheart, all you need to do is sign a simple authorization form. We drop the petition immediately. The family stays together. We just want to help you manage things while you're going through this difficult time. We love you. I looked at the message for a moment. Then I replied with a thumbs up emoji and put the phone in my desk drawer. Nathaniel called the next morning from what sounded like a hospital corridor. Background noise of wheels on linoleum, a PA system calling a code somewhere down the hall. Can we meet? He said. Not at my place. Not anywhere Clarice knows about. Somewhere small. I directed him to a coffee shop on a side street near Piedmont Park. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and no Instagram presence to speak of. I arrived first and took the corner booth farthest from the window. He came in 15 minutes later, still wearing his surgical scrubs. Dark blue, slightly rumpled at the cuffs. He was 35 years old, and he looked at that moment like a man who had not slept in 2 days. He sat down across from me and looked at his black coffee without drinking it. After you left Friday night, he said, Clarice told my mother that the ring story was a misunderstanding, that you'd offered to help as a gift and she hadn't realized you wanted credit for it. What did Eleanor say? Nothing. She looked at Clarice for about 4 seconds and then she said she was tired and she wanted to go home. A pause. My mother has never once said she was tired and wanted to go home early from anything in her entire life. I nodded. Saturday morning, he continued, your father came to the hospital. I went still. He was waiting in the parking structure when I came off night shift at 6. He had a document, a promissory note for $200,000. He told me it was a standard arrangement for family members joining the Bennett household, that the wedding vendors needed final payment by end of week or everything would be canceled, and that as the man marrying Clarice, it was my responsibility to ensure the event was funded. I looked at him steadily. He asked you for $200,000 in a parking garage. He asked me to sign for it? Yes. And if you refused, he would contact the hospital's credentialing board and 3 specific journalists he claimed to know at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He would allege that I had been emotionally abusive toward Clarice during our engagement. Nathaniel's jaw worked. He also said that regardless of what happened with the wedding, the ring was staying with Clarice as compensation for the family's time. The ring that I paid for. The ring that you paid for. I looked at the window. Outside, a woman was walking a retriever on a long leash, letting the dog investigate every possible inch of the sidewalk. The morning was cold and clear, the sky the particular pale blue of October. "You're not signing the document," I said. "I know I'm not. And you're not marrying Clarice." A silence. "I know," he said again. "I think I knew it before Friday. Friday just made the knowing undeniable." He rubbed the back of his neck. "What I'm trying to figure out is how to end this without my family being dragged through whatever your father is threatening. My mother has former colleagues attending that rehearsal dinner, federal judges, people she's known for 30 years. "When is the rehearsal dinner?" "Thursday." "Tell your father you need until Wednesday to review the document," I said. "Tell him you're having your attorney look at it. He'll accept that. It sounds like cooperation. And then Thursday evening, you bring the unsigned document to the dinner." Nathaniel looked at me. "What happens Thursday evening?" The bell above the coffee shop door chimed. We both looked up. Eleanor Prescott walked in. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, her reading glasses on a chain at her collarbone, a small leather notebook under one arm. She moved through the coffee shop with the unself-conscious ease of a woman who is comfortable in every room she enters, and she sat down across from us with the settled presence of someone who had already decided the contours of the conversation before she arrived. "I asked her to come," Nathaniel said. Eleanor looked at me. "I've been making some phone calls since Friday," she said. "Former colleagues at the county courthouse. I'm aware of the conservatorship petition." "How?" "Court filings are public record, and I have relationships with clerks going back 20 years. She ordered Earl Grey from a passing server without breaking eye contact with me. "The petition is baseless and it's malicious, but Gregory Thorne is skilled at keeping baseless petitions alive long enough to do damage." She set her notebook on the table. "I want to know what you're planning to do about it." "I'm letting it proceed," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "Because of discovery." "Yes." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but a recognition. "That's what I would have done." She opened the notebook, made a small notation. "My team confirmed your timeline with the county recorder's office. The Buckhead property deed is clean." I looked at her. "I found Meridian Capital 4 months ago," she said, without particular drama, as though she were describing something mildly interesting she'd read in the newspaper. "When Nathaniel told me he was serious about someone from the Bennett family, I did what I always do. I researched. The Bennett name appeared in a civil case from approximately 10 years ago, a harassment settlement. The case record showed an anonymous third-party payment of $65,000 toward the settlement balance, processed through a financial intermediary. The trail from that intermediary led, eventually, to a 24-year-old woman who had recently withdrawn from a graduate program at Georgia State. The coffee shop was quiet around us. Someone near the front was typing on a laptop. The retriever and its owner were still visible through the window, making their way down the block. "I traced that woman forward," Eleanor said, "to a Series A filing 7 years ago, to a company called Meridian Capital Group, to a CEO listed as a Bennett." She looked at me with the full weight of that careful, measured attention I had first felt in the private dining room on Friday evening. I came to that dinner to meet the woman who had built an $800 million firm from a position of complete financial destruction, and who had done it without telling a single member of her family. She paused. "I came because I wanted to understand whether you were protecting yourself or punishing them." "And?" I said. "And," she said, "watching you sit at that table for 2 hours while your parents mocked you in front of strangers without changing your expression, without raising your voice, without revealing a single card. I understood that you were neither." She picked up her tea when it arrived. "You were waiting," she said. "I was waiting," I agreed. Eleanor set her cup down and looked between me and her son. Then let's talk about Thursday. Because I want this done correctly. I want it done in a room full of witnesses, and I want it done in a way that Thorne cannot use against you in the remaining legal proceedings. She opened the notebook to a fresh page. Tell me what you need, she said, and let's build this properly. Thomas and 3 analysts worked until 2 in the morning. The conservatorship filing had opened the discovery window, and we moved through it with the focused efficiency of a team that had been waiting for exactly this. The financial picture that assembled itself across my conference table over the course of that evening was worse than I had estimated, and I had estimated it would be bad. The Hollis and Vanessa Bennett household was carrying $150,000 in unsecured credit card debt at interest rates between 19 and 24%. The lease on the Porsche Macan, registered in Hollis's name, driven exclusively by Clarice, featured in over 300 of Clarice's social media posts as my car, was 3 months delinquent. A formal repossession order had been issued by the dealership the previous week. The wedding vendor invoices totaled $217,000, approximately $40,000 of which were marked with final notice language. The Buckhead property deed was immaculate, as Thomas had confirmed. Meridian Capital Group, LLC. Recorded. Clean. I printed everything on legal-size paper. I organized it into a black leather binder, the kind we use for client presentations, the kind that communicated seriousness without theatricality. I locked it in the office safe. Then I called Diana. Thursday, I said. I know, she said. I'll be at the AV booth by 6:30. I hung up and stood at the window for a long time, looking at the city in its late-night configuration. Quieter, more honest, the way cities are when most of the performance has gone to bed. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that, because people often assume that what I did on Thursday evening came from anger, from the accumulated bitterness of a lifetime of being underestimated and used. It didn't. I had processed the anger years ago, in small, private increments, the way you process any grief that doesn't have a clean resolution. What I felt, standing at that window on Monday night, was something closer to clarity. The kind that comes not from triumph, but from the simple, clean recognition that something broken beyond repair is finally, mercifully, about to stop pretending it isn't. I went to bed at midnight. I slept soundly, the way I always do before something important. The oak doors of the Oak Creek Country Club stood open to the October evening, flanked by arrangements of white dahlias and trailing ivy that must have cost someone a considerable amount of money. Money that, as of 48 hours ago, I knew with legal precision did not exist in any of the relevant accounts. I handed my keys to the valet. He glanced at the Prius with the involuntary flicker that valets at places like this can't quite suppress. I smiled at him pleasantly and walked inside. The grand ballroom was magnificent in the way that rooms are magnificent when they have been assembled by people who understand aesthetics but not sustainability. Crystal chandeliers throwing warm gold light across 50 guests in their finest autumn clothes. A string quartet in the far corner playing something by Vivaldi. Servers moving through the room with silver trays of Perrier Jouet. The flowers were everywhere. The candles were everywhere. Everything smelled of money and gardenia and the particular anxiety of people who needed tonight to go perfectly. I stood near the entrance for a moment and took it in. My mother was already holding court near the stone fireplace on the far wall. She was wearing the beaded gown, the one purchased 3 days ago on a card that had been over its limit before the transaction cleared. Under the chandelier light, it was genuinely beautiful. Under the chandelier light, everything in this room looked like something it wasn't. I moved to a position near the side wall, set my bag on a chair, and watched. Hollis was at the mahogany bar, nursing something amber, his eyes tracking the room with the restless surveillance of a man waiting for a specific person to arrive. He had not yet seen me. I preferred it that way. The Prescott family arrived as a unit, Eleanor and Raymond together, followed by Nathaniel and 4 family members I recognized from the engagement dinner. They moved through the room with the easy confidence of people who had nothing to prove in it, and several of the country club members near the entrance straightened almost imperceptibly as Eleanor passed, the unconscious acknowledgement of genuine authority that no amount of rehearsal can manufacture. Nathaniel caught my eye across the room. A small nod. Everything in place. I nodded back. My mother saw the Prescotts arrive and moved toward them with the momentum of a woman who had been mentally rehearsing this approach for weeks. She intercepted Eleanor near the string quartet, positioning herself with her back to the room so that the nearby guests would be drawn in as an audience. "Eleanor," Vanessa said, with the specific warmth that precedes condescension. "I'm so glad you could make it. I know environments like this can feel a little overwhelming if you're not accustomed to the formality. Please don't hesitate to ask the catering staff if you need any help with the menu. Some of the French preparations can be a little confusing." She said it kindly. She said it with her hand lightly touching Eleanor's arm. She said it in a room full of people, including the current president of the Oak Creek Country Club, who happened to be standing 4 feet to Eleanor's left. Eleanor looked at my mother for a moment with the mild, clinical attention of someone reading a document for errors. "How thoughtful," she said. Her voice was smooth and carried without effort. "I do know this club fairly well, actually. I served on the board of directors here for 6 years before I stepped down to accept my federal judicial appointment. I was the one who drafted the revised membership bylaws, the amendment that opened the application process to non-legacy candidates." A pause, perfectly timed. "That was the amendment that allowed Hollis to join, if I'm remembering correctly." The country club president turned his head. 2 guests nearby exchanged a glance. Vanessa's smile stayed on her face the way a flag stays on a pole in a storm. Technically still there, no longer serving its purpose. "I do hope you're enjoying the amenities," Eleanor added, and the graciousness in her voice was the most devastating thing about it. "It's always lovely to see newer members making the most of their access." Vanessa murmured something about checking on the catering schedule and moved away at a pace that was not quite fast enough to look like flight, but close. I met Eleanor's eyes across the room. She looked at me for exactly 1 second before returning her attention to Raymond, who was describing something to a Prescott cousin and hadn't noticed any of it. "Real wealth is silent," she had told me at the coffee shop. "Only debt has to be loud." I picked up my bag and moved toward the hallway. I heard them before I rounded the corner. Hollis's voice. Low, pressurized, the whisper of a man who wants to threaten someone without creating witnesses. And Nathaniel's, quieter, measured, the voice of a person who has decided not to give an inch but sees no reason to be theatrical about it. I stopped just before the turn in the corridor, in the shadow of an alcove that held a tall arrangement of dried magnolia branches and a small bronze sculpture of a hunting dog. I could see them without being seen. Hollis had Nathaniel backed against the stone wall beside the entrance to the private restrooms, not physically pinning him, but using his body's mass the way he used most things, as a means of applying pressure. The promissory note was in his hand. "I'm not asking anymore," Hollis said. "This is how this works. You're joining my family. You're marrying my daughter. There are responsibilities that come with that. The vendors need $200,000 by end of week, or I pull the whole event and I tell every person in that room that you walked out on Clarice the week before the wedding." Hollis. And then I make some calls. I know people at 3 hospitals in this city. I know people at the credentialing board. One conversation. One. And the question of whether Nathaniel Prescott has the temperament for surgical practice becomes a question that follows you for years. He shook the document slightly. "Or you sign this tonight, and we move forward like a family." Nathaniel looked at the paper. He looked at Hollis. "I told you I needed my attorney to review it first." "Your attorney had 2 days. My attorney needs more time. Your attorney doesn't get more time." Hollis stepped slightly closer. "Sign it." I walked around the corner. My heels on the marble floor made a sound that echoed in the corridor, and Hollis turned toward it with the startled reflex of a man who believed he was alone in a private space. For 1/2 second, his expression cycled through surprise, then recognition, then the rapid recalibration of someone adjusting their strategy in real time. He did not get the chance to recalibrate. I crossed the distance between us in 4 steps, reached out, and took the promissory note from his hand. "Hey!" I held it up to the corridor light and read from the top of the first page. $200,000 at 8% interest, payable on demand, secured by... Oh, this is interesting. Secured by the personal guarantee of one Nathaniel Jerome Prescott, M.D. I looked at my father. "You had someone draft this overnight, in a rented tuxedo, in a parking garage before 6 in the morning. Give that back to me, Amelia." His voice had gone very quiet. "This is not your business." "The ring is my business," I said. "The one you told Nathaniel you'd be keeping as compensation. The one I paid for. That makes this my business. Give me the document." I looked at him for one long moment. Then I gripped the paper with both hands and tore it cleanly in half. I let both pieces go. They drifted to the marble floor in the unhurried way of things that have been waiting a long time to come apart. Hollis made a sound that came from somewhere below language, a raw, guttural sound, the noise of a man whose last move has just been taken off the board. And then he started shouting. The ballroom doors swung open. The next 4 minutes happened the way significant things happen, very quickly, and then all at once. Vanessa and Clarice came through the ballroom doors first, followed by 6 or 7 guests who had been near enough to hear Hollis's voice carry through the paneled walls. Clarice saw the torn document on the floor and dropped to her knees to gather the pieces, making a sound I had never heard from her. Not theatrical, not performed, but the raw, animal sound of someone watching the last version of their planned life disintegrate on a marble hallway floor. Hollis was still shouting. Nathaniel had stepped between us, his hand raised toward Hollis with the calm, non-negotiable authority of a man who spent his professional life in rooms where someone had to be the steadiest person present. "Take 1 step towards her," Nathaniel said, quietly enough that only the immediate circle could hear it, "and I will personally walk you to the parking lot and call the police from the front steps of this building." Hollis stopped. Vanessa was calling for the country club security. 2 guards appeared from the direction of the entrance hallway, took in the scene, and looked uncertainly between a shouting man in a rented tuxedo and a woman in a navy dress holding a designer bag with an expression of complete composure. I reached into my bag and produced my platinum membership card. "I'm a current member in good standing," I said. "I'm heading back to the ballroom." The guards looked at the card. They stepped aside. I turned and walked back through the doors. Diana was already in the audiovisual booth when I entered. A narrow room behind a frosted glass partition at the far end of the ballroom, housing the soundboard, the lighting controls, and the projection system that was ordinarily used for anniversary slideshows and corporate award evenings. She had her laptop open and a cable in her hand. She looked up when I came in. "Ready?" "Ready," I said. I unzipped my bag and took out the tablet. Thomas had uploaded the complete financial dossier that afternoon. Organized, clearly labeled, every document legally obtained through the discovery process that my parents had themselves initiated when they filed the conservatorship petition. I plugged the cable into the tablet and synced the system. "Give me 30 seconds," Diana said, her hands moving quickly across the soundboard. I picked up the wireless microphone from the stand beside the board and held it at my side. The string quartet was mid-phrase when the audio feed cut. The sudden silence moved through the ballroom like a weather change. Physical, immediate, causing every conversation in the room to pause as 50 guests looked up from their plates and glasses toward the front of the space. Then the projector hummed to life. The beam crossed the room and struck the large blank wall behind the head table. The wall that had been left empty for what the event coordinator's notes described as the couple's photo retrospective. Instead of photographs, what appeared was a spreadsheet, clean, clinical, mercilessly legible. I stepped out of the booth and walked to the center of the room. I was aware of the shift in the room's attention, the way it moved from confusion to focus, the way the people who understood financial documents leaned forward while the people who didn't looked at the people who did for cues. I raised the microphone. "Good evening," I said. "I apologize for the interruption. I'll be brief." My parents came through the ballroom doors at that moment. Hollis still flushed, Vanessa 2 steps behind him, Clarice behind her, clutching the torn halves of the promissory note. They stopped when they saw the projection. They stopped when they saw me standing in the center of the room with a microphone. I watched Hollis's face cycle through the same sequence I had watched in the VIP lounge 3 nights ago. Surprise, recognition, recalibration, and then something new. Something that looked, for the first time in my memory of him, like fear. "As most of you know," I said, "my parents filed an emergency legal petition this week claiming that I am mentally incompetent to manage my own financial affairs and requesting that the court grant them full authority over my estate. They've characterized my behavior at Friday's engagement dinner as a psychotic episode." A murmur moved through the room. "I want to be transparent with you about 2 things. The first is that the petition was dismissed by the court this afternoon." I tapped the tablet. The spreadsheet was replaced by an official court document bearing the county seal. "The judge reviewed the evidence and dismissed the filing as, and I'm quoting directly, frivolous, malicious, and a demonstrable abuse of the judicial process." The room was very still. "The second thing I want to be transparent about," I said, "is the financial situation of the 2 people who asked a judge to declare me incompetent, because they've spent this evening presenting themselves to you as successful, established members of this community. And I think given that they voluntarily opened a legal proceeding about financial responsibility, you deserve to know what their finances actually look like." I tapped the screen. Slide 1. The red Porsche Macan that my sister has featured in over 300 social media posts as her own vehicle. It's leased in my father's name. The lease is 3 months delinquent. The dealership issued a repossession order 6 days ago. That car will be collected within the week. Clarice made a sound. A guest near the front row whispered something to the person beside them. Slide 2. My parents' current credit card debt, $150,000 across 4 accounts at interest rates between 19 and 24%. For context, the gown my mother is wearing tonight was purchased 3 days ago on the card with the highest interest rate, which had already exceeded its credit limit at the time of the transaction. Vanessa's hand went to the beading at her neckline. The country club president, standing near the bar, set down his glass. Slide 3. I paused. Not for drama, because what came next required the room to be completely still. My parents have spent the past several years telling their friends, their social circle, and anyone who would listen about their estate in Buckhead. The 5-bedroom home, the heated pool, the manicured grounds, the generational wealth they've built. I tapped the screen one final time. What appeared on the wall behind the head table was a property deed, formal, official, bearing the seal of the county recorder's office. The address was unmistakable. Several guests in the room had been to that address for dinner parties and holiday gatherings over the years. At the top of the deed, in clean block letters, was the name of the title holder, Meridian Capital Group, LLC. My parents do not own that property, I said. They have not owned it for 3 years. 3 years ago, the bank moved to foreclose on that home after a second mortgage default. A private holding company purchased the distressed debt at auction and allowed my parents to remain in the property on a month-to-month lease agreement. That holding company is mine. My parents are my tenants. They have been living in my property, at my discretion, for 36 months, while telling everyone in this room that they own it. The silence in the ballroom was the most complete silence I had ever been inside. Hollis was standing near the doorway with his hands at his sides and his mouth open. Vanessa had sat down in a chair near the wall, not by choice, but because her legs had simply declined to continue. Clarice was looking at her parents with an expression I had never seen on her face. Not fury, not performance, but the raw, genuine shock of someone who has just discovered that the floor they grew up walking on was never as solid as they believed. I walked across the ballroom floor toward the head table. I reached into my bag and took out a sheaf of documents bound with a metal clip. I set them on the table. That is a 30-day notice of lease termination, I said. Hollis, Vanessa, you have 30 days to vacate the property. If you have not done so by the 1st of next month, the county sheriff's office has been authorized to facilitate the removal of your belongings and the changing of all locks. I set the microphone down on the table beside the documents. I was done. Clarice moved before either of her parents did. She had crossed half the distance between the door and Nathaniel before I registered that she was moving. A desperate, purposeful crossing of the room, her champagne gown catching the light, her hands reaching for his. She found them and held on. Nathaniel! Her voice was stripped of everything. No performance, no camera awareness, no carefully calibrated emotional tone. Just 27 years old and terrified. Please, we don't need them. We don't need any of this. We can leave right now. We can go to the courthouse tomorrow morning or fly somewhere tonight. Just you and me. I'll sign anything your mother wants. A prenup, a postnup, anything. I'll cut them off completely. I swear it. You make enough for both of us. I'll rebuild everything. Just don't leave me here. The room was listening to every word. I don't think Clarice knew that. Or perhaps she did and had stopped caring because the thing she was most afraid of was not the audience, but the answer. Nathaniel looked down at their joined hands. He looked at her face. He looked at her the way I had watched him look at surgical diagrams during the one hospital visit I had made when he was presenting a complex case, with total attention, with the willingness to see exactly what was there rather than what he hoped was there. You just described leaving your family, he said, signing legal documents and rebuilding your finances, in the same sentence where you told me you loved me. Clarice opened her mouth. You didn't say you were sorry, he said. You didn't say you wished you'd been honest. You said I make enough for both of us. That's not what It's exactly what you said, Clarice. Not unkind, not angry, just precise. And I think you meant it. I think that's actually how you see this. And I think you've probably seen it that way for longer than either of us wants to admit. She let go of his hands. Nathaniel turned to face the room. He wasn't holding a microphone. He didn't need one. My family builds things on honesty, he said. That's not a value we talk about. It's one we live by. My parents built their careers on it. I built my practice on it. He looked at the assembled guests, the friends, the colleagues, the country club members who had gathered at this rehearsal dinner believing they were celebrating something real. There will be no wedding tomorrow. I'm sorry for the disruption to your evening. I'm grateful for your friendship and your presence here. He turned to Clarice. The ring, he said, simply, without malice. Her face crumpled. Nathaniel, it doesn't belong to you, Clarice. You know that. You've known it since the jeweler's counter. For a long moment, she stood completely still, the diamond catching the chandelier light the way it had at the engagement dinner 3 nights ago, the way it had in photographs posted to her social media account, the way it had in all the versions of herself she had been performing for an audience that was now watching her in person. She reached up with her right hand. She pulled the ring off her finger. She placed it in Nathaniel's open palm. The metallic sound it made, small, precise, final, was the quietest thing in the room and somehow the loudest. Nathaniel closed his fist around it. He looked at his mother across the ballroom. Eleanor gave a single nod, precise as a period at the end of a sentence. Raymond put his hand lightly on her back. We're leaving, Nathaniel said to his family. Thank you for being here. He walked across the room toward me. He held out the ring. This is yours, he said. I took it. It was lighter than I expected, or perhaps I had simply been carrying heavier things for so long that everything else felt weightless by comparison. Thank you, I said, for Friday, for tonight, for all of it. Thank you, he said, for being honest when everyone around you made dishonesty the easier choice. He held out his hand. I shook it. It felt like the beginning of something rather than an ending. Hollis launched himself across the room. I heard him before I saw him. The heavy, uneven stride of a man who had been drinking since 7 o'clock and had run out of strategies and was now running on something more primitive. Nathaniel turned and put himself between us in one smooth movement, and 2 of his cousins materialized from the edges of the room with the coordinated ease of people who had been paying attention all evening and were unsurprised by this development. Back up, Hollis, Nathaniel said. She did this, Hollis said, pointing past Nathaniel's shoulder at me. She planned this. She's been planning this for years. She's sick. You're in a room full of witnesses, Nathaniel said, and your hand is approximately 6 inches from a woman. I would think very carefully about the next 4 seconds. Hollis stopped. His chest heaved. He looked at the room, at the guests who had moved back to the edges, at the country club president who had already taken out his phone, at Eleanor Prescott standing near the exit with her coat over her arm and her eyes steady and cold. The fight went out of him, not gracefully, not with dignity. It just left, the way air leaves a punctured thing, and what remained was a 63-year-old man in a rented tuxedo standing in a room full of people who were looking at him the way people look at something they can't unsee. Vanessa, from her chair near the wall, let out a long, keening sound and slid to the floor. Several guests moved toward her. I watched the performance, the chest clutching, the gasped appeals for help, and I felt the old reflexes stir, the childhood conditioning to run toward her, to fix it, to manage it. I let them stir. I did not move, because I had watched my mother perform collapse and catastrophe my entire life, and I knew the difference between a woman who needed help and a woman who needed an audience, and so did every other person in that room. Nobody ran to her. The waitstaff continued quietly collecting glasses. The country club president walked toward the bar, shaking his head. I stepped around Nathaniel's cousins and walked toward the audio-visual booth. I unplugged my tablet. I zipped my bag. I took one long look at the room. The scattered guests, the shattered head table, the projection screen still glowing with the property deed, my parents at opposite ends of their own disaster. I touched Nathaniel's arm lightly as I passed him. Go home, I said. You're done here. He nodded. I pushed open the oak doors and walked out into the October night. The Country Club Gossip Network, as Diana called it, moved at a speed that no fiber optic cable could match. By 8 the following morning, I had received a formal communication from the Oak Creek Country Club Board of Directors, a mass membership notice citing the immediate termination of Hollis and Vanessa Bennett's platinum membership on grounds of severe conduct violations and demonstrated financial insolvency. The board had apparently convened an emergency session by phone before midnight. I read it over coffee in my kitchen, in the clothes I had slept in, with the Atlanta skyline doing its Saturday morning performance outside my window. The wedding vendors had been expecting final payment by midnight. When no wire transfer arrived, they moved with the decisive efficiency of businesses that had been in the industry long enough to recognize a default when it was coming. The florist sent a crew to the venue at 7 to collect the arrangements. The catering company canceled the kitchen order and issued a breach of contract notice. By 9 o'clock, the reception hall that Clarice had photographed 14 times for social media, the room with the draped ceilings and the parquet dance floor and the monogrammed chair covers had been stripped back to its neutral configuration, waiting for the next event. Clarice posted one more video. This one was not carefully lit. It was filmed on her phone in what appeared to be a car in a parking lot, with the kind of unflattering natural light that her editing software usually corrected for. She was not crying artfully. She looked tired and genuinely bewildered, the way people look when they have spent years constructing a version of their life for an audience and have just discovered that the audience was watching something else entirely. The comments were not what she was used to. The gossip blog post had gone up overnight. Anonymous source, highly detailed, devastating in its accuracy. Her 60,000 followers had read it before they saw her video, and the comment section reflected that. Several brands had already sent disengagement notices to her management email by the time she posted. By afternoon, 3 more had followed. I did not feel satisfaction watching this. I want to be honest about that. I felt something more complicated. The specific, heavy sadness of watching someone you grew up with, someone you once shared a bedroom and a breakfast table with, discover the consequences of choices they made freely and repeatedly. Clarice was not a villain. She was a person who had been told for 27 years that performance was survival, and she had become very good at performing, and she had never been shown what happened when the performance stopped. Thomas called at 10. Thorne withdrew this morning. He told your parents he could no longer represent them as they were unable to meet their financial obligations to his firm. A pause. He also cited, and I quote, irreconcilable conflicts arising from the factual record, which I think means he looked at the discovery documents and decided he didn't want his name on this case. And the counterfiling? Moving forward. Defamation, malicious prosecution, attempted fraudulent seizure of assets. The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing. Without Thorne or any replacement counsel, they're looking at representing themselves, which, given the financial disclosure record, is going to be a fairly uncomfortable experience for them. Let me know when the hearing date is confirmed. One more thing. The eviction notice was served this morning. Process server confirmed delivery at 9:17. I looked out the window. Thank you, Thomas. And 30 days pass the way difficult months pass when you have work to absorb yourself in. Not slowly, not quickly, but thoroughly. I closed the Chicago deal. I began due diligence on a mixed-use development in Nashville that had been on my radar for 2 quarters. I had dinner with Diana on 3 separate Thursdays, the way we had been doing for 15 years, and we talked about everything except my family, which was its own kind of relief. On the morning of the 30th day, I drove to Buckhead. I parked on the far side of the street, half a block down, with the engine running and the heat on low. The October that had started this whole sequence of events had given way to November, and the maples lining the street had gone completely gold. The tow truck arrived at 9. Clarice came out of the house still in her pajamas, waving her arms, making appeals to the driver that I could not hear through the car window, but could reconstruct from 34 years of knowing her. The driver did not respond to them. He hooked the Porsche and pulled it onto the flatbed with the impersonal efficiency of a person doing a job, and the bright red car that had appeared in 300 social media posts disappeared around the corner, and Clarice stood on the driveway with her arms at her sides. The moving truck arrived 20 minutes later. The movers carried things out of the house and into the truck with a neutral professionalism that I found unexpectedly difficult to watch. Not because I doubted my decision, but because the velvet sofa that had sat in my parents' living room my entire childhood looked very different in the November light than it had looked indoors. Smaller, shabbier, the fabric worn in the places where the same people had sat in the same positions for decades. My father came out carrying a cardboard box. He moved slowly. His shoulders were bent in a way I had never seen them bent. He had spent 63 years filling every room he entered and standing in the cold morning light on the driveway of a house he no longer owned, with a cardboard box in his arms and no audience to perform for. He looked like what he was, an old man who had spent a great deal of his life pretending and who had finally run out of room to do it in. I watched until the truck was loaded. Then I started the car and drove away. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November, rain coming down steadily on the Atlanta skyline. when my phone showed Hollis's name. Thomas had advised me to keep the line open until the legal proceedings were fully resolved. The defamation and malicious prosecution suit had settled the previous morning. My parents, without counsel and with their financial records fully exposed to the court, had declined to contest it. The settlement was not large in monetary terms. It didn't need to be. The public record was the point. I answered, "Olivia," and he never called me Olivia. That was the first thing I noticed. The unfamiliar name, the wrong name, the name of a version of me that didn't exist. I didn't correct him. "I'm here," I said. His voice was different. I had heard my father's voice in every configuration over 34 years, confident, demanding, dismissive, theatrical, furious. I had not heard it like this. Small, careful, the voice of a man testing whether the floor would hold his weight before he put it down. "I wanted to call," he said. I wanted to hear your voice." I said nothing. "It's not good here, Amelia. The apartment is... It's not what we're used to. Your mother has a hard time sleeping. The neighborhood is loud. Clarice can't find work that pays enough, and she's living with us in the second bedroom, and it's very small, and we're..." A pause. "We've lost a lot of friends. The club, the neighborhood, people we knew for 20 years don't return our calls." I listened. "I know I was wrong," he said. "I want you to know I know that. The conservatorship was... I was desperate and I made a terrible decision. I've made a lot of terrible decisions. I know that." I waited. "I'm not asking for much," he said. "Just maybe a loan. Temporary $50,000, just to stabilize things. To get your mother somewhere with a garden maybe, somewhere quieter. To give Clarice a chance to get back on her feet. We would pay it back. I promise we would pay it back. I've never asked you for charity, Amelia. I'm asking now. Just as your father. Please." He stopped. I sat forward and rested my elbows on my desk. "Dad," I said, and I used the word carefully, because it was still true in the biological sense, and I was done pretending things weren't what they were. "Do you remember what you told Eleanor Prescott at the engagement dinner about me?" Silence. "You told a room full of people that you had cut off my financial support years ago because I needed to learn that I couldn't live off handouts forever. You said it was tough love. You said it built character." He didn't speak. "You were right," I said. "It did. It built exactly the kind of character that let me sit quietly at that table while you said those things and know, with absolute certainty, that I was going to be fine." I paused. "You should try it," I said. "The independence. It's harder than it looks, but you might find you're more capable than you think." I ended the call. I opened my contacts. Hollis Bennett, blocked. Vanessa Bennett, blocked. Clarice Bennett. I held my thumb over the button for a moment longer than I'd held it over the others. Then I pressed it. The line went quiet. Not empty. Just finally, completely mine. November arrived again the way it does in Atlanta. Not with the dramatic color of the northern states, but with a quiet, gradual letting go, the maples releasing gold one leaf at a time over a city that moves a little slower in the cooling air. I was carrying a pecan pie I had made myself, badly, if I'm being honest, the crust too thick on one side, and a bottle of Burgundy that was significantly better than the pie when I pulled into the long driveway of a brick estate in the eastern suburbs on Thanksgiving morning. The house was large and warm-looking, the kind of house that has been lived in by people who actually live, not performed at, not maintained as a status symbol, but genuinely occupied by a family that ate in the kitchen and argued about football in the living room and left books face down on the arms of sofas. I had barely raised my hand to knock when the door opened. Eleanor was wearing a deep red dress and an expression I had not seen on her face in any of the professional contexts I'd encountered her. Relaxed, open, genuinely warm. She looked at the pie and the wine and me standing on her doorstep, and she pulled me into a hug. Not the brief social hug of acquaintances. A real one. Firm, unhurried, the kind that says you are welcome here in a language that doesn't need translation. "Welcome home, Amelia," she said. I had not expected the word home. I had expected welcome. The difference was small and enormous at the same time, and I felt it somewhere behind my sternum as I stepped into the foyer and was hit by the smell of roasting turkey and sweet potato casserole and the warm, bright noise of a house full of people who were genuinely glad to be together. Raymond was at the far end of the hallway making someone laugh. A full, unself-conscious laugh, the kind you can't perform. He saw me and raised his hand in greeting with the easy warmth of a person for whom welcome is not an event but a default. Nathaniel came out of the kitchen in a gray sweater and oven mitts, carrying a casserole dish that he handed off to a passing cousin before crossing the room. "How's the Empire?" he said. "Expanding. How's the hospital?" "Approved the pediatric program last week. We start in January." He looked genuinely happy. Not relieved, not performing happiness, actually simply, quietly happy. I recognized it as the expression of a person who had recently removed a significant weight from their life and was still adjusting to the lightness. We stood for a moment in the foyer of his parents' house, two people who had survived the same collision with something toxic and come out the other side still standing. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I'm glad I was asked," I said. The table was enormous. Loaded with food, ringed by family members who talked over each other and stole from each other's plates and argued about things that didn't matter in the way that people argue about things when they feel safe enough to argue. Raymond stood at the head of it before we ate and spoke about gratitude and resilience and the profound, irreducible importance of the people you choose to keep. I closed my eyes while he spoke. I felt something building behind my eyes. Not quite tears, or perhaps exactly tears, but of a kind I hadn't had much experience with. Not the tears that come from pain or frustration or the exhaustion of enduring things that should not have to be endured. These were different. These were the tears of a person who has been bracing against something for so long that when the pressure finally releases, the body doesn't quite know what to do with the absence of it. I breathed through it. I opened my eyes. Eleanor was looking at me from across the table. She leaned forward slightly. "You belong at a table where your presence is celebrated," she said, quietly enough that it was just for me. "Not tolerated, not managed, celebrated. This is where you belong." I looked around the table, at the cousins debating something passionately, at Raymond still standing, finishing his blessing, at Nathaniel pouring wine with the focused care of a man who takes small pleasures seriously. For 34 years, I had believed that family was a sentence, not a choice. That the people you were born into were the ones you were obligated to endure, that the ache of sitting at a table where you were invisible was simply the price of belonging somewhere. I had been wrong about that. I know that now with a certainty that no longer requires defending. A real family does not evaluate your worth against your sisters. A real family does not weaponize your loyalty or inventory your usefulness. A real family does not need you to be smaller so that someone else can appear larger. A real family makes room. I picked up my fork and I ate the best Thanksgiving meal of my life. I drove home late that night through empty Atlanta streets, the city quiet and amber lit under a sky that had finally cleared. The pie plate was in the back seat, empty. The wine had been finished by people who appreciated it. The heater was running and the city moved past the windows, and I felt the specific, unperformative contentment of someone who knows, without needing to announce it, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. I have told this story because I think there are people who need to hear it. Women particularly. Women who were told their whole lives that keeping the peace was the same as having peace. Women who have sat at tables where they were the punchline and the provider simultaneously, who have funded the comfort of people who dismissed them, who have carried secrets that were not theirs to carry because the alternative felt like abandonment. I want you to know something. Walking away from people who use you is not abandonment. It is not selfishness or instability or the narcissism they will almost certainly accuse you of when you stop being useful. It is the most honest thing you can do for yourself and ultimately, whether they ever acknowledge it or not, for them. Hollis and Vanessa Bennett are living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of the city. My father works in sales. My mother tends a small balcony garden. Clarice is employed at a gym and is, by what accounts I have received, doing the quiet, unglamorous, necessary work of building something real for the first time. I do not hate them. I do not wish them harm. I simply no longer make space for them inside the life I have built. And the life I have built, the one I constructed in silence, from nothing, through years of early mornings and grinding work and the particular loneliness of succeeding at something no one around you can see, that life is mine. Entirely, completely, unassailably mine. The greatest revenge is not the projector screen. It is not the eviction notice or the property deed or the legal dissolution of every lie they told. Those were necessary, yes, but they were just the clearing, just the removal of the debris. The greatest revenge is this: waking up on an ordinary Tuesday morning, pouring a cup of coffee, standing at a window that belongs to you, and feeling, Not triumph, not vindication, but something quieter and more durable than either of those. Feeling safe in your own life, on your own terms, without anyone's permission. That is what they could never take from me. That is what they never even knew was there. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. If any part of it landed somewhere true for you, if you've ever sat at a table where you were unseen, or walked away from something that should have been safe but wasn't, or built something beautiful in the quiet while no one was watching, I want you to know that I see you, and I hope this helped. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Every subscriber is someone who decided that stories like this one deserve to be heard. And if you have a story of your own, drop it in the comments. You never know whose life it might change. Take care of yourselves, build something real, and never, ever let anyone convince you that you are less than exactly what you are.